Hello.
Hello, Bartek. How are you doing?
Good, Ryan. How are you?
I'm doing very, very well. I'm just here, ready to talk about something, but I don't know what yet. How about you inform me a bit on the layout of the land here?
You know, it's really convenient that you're ready to talk about something, Ryan, because we're actually... Look around us. We're on a show.
We're on a show.
We're on a podcast.
What's a podcast?
Well, you see, back when iPods came out, people thought, like, what if we do, like, radio, but, like, on our iPods? So they created, these kind of radio shows, and they called them podcasts.
Oh, they called them iPodcasts.
And the terminology still continue. Like, we're on Apple Podcasts, but, we're not necessarily, like, an Apple show or anything like that.
Not yet.
But basically, when we say podcast, we kind of just mean recorded radio audio show kind of thing.
Wow, where do video podcasts fall into this equation? Which we don't do.
Yeah, I don't know. It's weird. So I think that they're kind of something different, but, some people have video formats for the show. But you know what? We don't have to stick to traditional structures of things. We can be our own thing.
And sometimes we can talk about movies, something that podcasts don't do enough of.
Yeah.
And they don't have Polish people do it, who are always spitting. And that's why we're different.
This was a very good answer to the question. I hope you all enjoyed the show. This has been our episode on what podcasts are, or what they can be.
But who are they?
They?
And how did they escape the law? And now we become serial.
I'm like, wait, who's they? Did we establish a they?
They, the podcast. Who are they?
The podcast is not an entity.
We explained what they are, but we never explained how they are. And so, emotionally speaking, we know how they are functioning, but where are they now?
This is all confusing, so I'm going to answer a question you didn't answer. We are called Spit and Polished, likingly, because we're always spitting and we both happen to be polished, and we are doing our show, Pictures Powwow.
I'm sorry I didn't answer that answer. I'm so sorry. You literally just said, I'm going to answer an answer you didn't give, and I'm like, okay.
Yes, well, put it down in the email below.
Put it in the email, spit and
Ryan
polish
in editing, you know what you have to do.
No, I'm not doing anything different.
Ryan in editing, you can take a break this week.
Thank you. Yes, I will take a break. And this episode will come out after Easter now, thanks to that. I'll get 2 weeks off. No, we are here to talk about movies on Pictures Powwow, where we talk about movies that came recommended. Bartek will recommend a film one week, I the next, and you, the listening people out there, can recommend movies to us. We add them to a list, so feel free to contact us with a movie suggestion. It's always welcome, but it would be greatly obliged if you could suggest movies that are at least easy enough to find, because there are some on our list that I have a little asterisk to. I'm like, I need to I need to find a good copy of this.
Yeah, there have been a couple where I'm like, I have to look for that at some point just so we can actually, pick it.
Yeah, but we are doing a listening people's recommendation. My wife, Rachel, who was the guest last week, recommended Babe. Yes, Babe from 1995, starring James Cromwell and a pig.
Yeah, not to be confused with The Babe.
Not confused with The Babe or Babe, a pig in the city.
Starring J. Crom.
No, or if you type Babe into an illegal site, I'm not going to say what type of bay, you'll get many, many different types of recommendations if you don't specify the year.
What if you put like a different word, like Big Babe? Would that give us something?
Yeah. And then if you put hot in there and somewhere too.
And maybe like double.
Yeah. And throbbing.
And just so you know that like they have many entries, you can put some big number like 68 or 70 or something like that.
Something in between there.
Something in between, like 69.
Yeah, almost 20.
Yeah.
So
and triple X, because X can mean anything. So
you're looking for the Xander Cage movie starring Vin Diesel, triple X. And the second one, which stars Ice Cube, where he fights against the president.
You're funny, Ryan, but you're getting away from the porn jokes. So
that there,
Ryan in editing, get off your break. You have to cut out what Ryan and
that there was a top joke. You know what? That wins the award at the Academies for top joke.
No, Ryan, we were talking about that before the recording. People don't have context.
Which is for kings. And let's get into Babe. If you have not seen Babe, what can I say? You go watch it, because we're going to talk about it now. I have seen this. I grew up with this film. It wasn't as big in my household. I was talking to my parents about this, and they said, "Oh, that was more Lana's demographic." So, like my sister, who is a couple years older, and makes sense because this came out in 1995. I would have
Yeah.
been a couple years old at
Yeah,
the
like
time,
two
so
and a bit, maybe.
and I didn't think I don't recollect it being on television as much as other children's films like Your Big Fat Liars, like Jumanji, and so on and so forth. But my family had it on video. My sister watched it a bunch apparently, but it was one that I've seen occasionally, but not a lot of in my life. Not where I'm just like, oh, this is a classic specifically for me as a kid. I've probably seen it equal amount to the second film as well. So some of the elements blur together a little bit. There's way more of the duck in the second one than
Okay.
in the first. So yeah, and way more Magda as well. So and less James Cromwell. But that is briefly my history with it. What about you, Babe?
I'm not 100% sure, but for some reason, like I've always known about the film and I've always associated it with the classroom that I had when I was in grade prep, which in Victoria prep is the grade that you do before grade 1. So,
Mm-hmm.
you're like 5 years old. So I'm thinking maybe I might have seen it when I was in prep, like at school, but I'm not entirely sure. I've always known what it was, and I remember when it was recommended last week, um, I didn't know that there were two films. So I was like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
babe, it's something like The City, right?
No, that's the second.
Yeah, and then when I looked it up, I'm like, oh, no, that's a sequel, and this is the first one, so okay.
Mm-hmm.
So I might have seen it, but I can't say for sure.
Now you have.
I knew that it was like a, cute talking pig film.
Very much responsible for what we have now when it comes to these talking animal movies. The big influx of them
Mm.
where they CGI with the animals' mouths to make them talk. It's become more of a burden, if anything, in the genre. There's very few
Yeah.
films that you could say utilizes the live action talking animals as well as Babe. Hence, it still stands out as quite a titan when it comes to not only children and families entertainment, but specifically this style of it, where you have so many of them now where it's kind of embarrassing when you see them. We even talked about this briefly, well, you guys did when Snow Dogs was covered, where it's like there's that one sequence where the animals talk, and many people believed that that was the whole movie. Like
Yes,
everyone's
that's
like,
right.
everyone thought the whole movie was
It's like
all
a
the
talking
dogs
dog film,
are
yeah.
talking and having wacky adventures. And same with Kangaroo Jack, where everyone thought it was a movie where a kangaroo
Yeah.
talked. At least in that film, it was a CGI kangaroo. That was like a whole little creature. That wasn't like a real kangaroo that they moved the mouth of, like here in Babe. But I just wanted to touch upon that because that is important. And for our podcast, we've done a lot of children's films, family films, but we haven't really touched upon that element of family films as often. If ever, I'm trying to recollect, have we ever? There's been so many films. I'm sure.
How did Racing Stripes do it? Did they do
Yeah,
lip stuff?
they did lip stuff. So we did Racing Stripes, and that's probably the main one I can recall that we've done that has had that gimmick. Usually, there've been stuff like Kangaroo Jack and Snow Dogs, where it's like a one scene thing that tricks you into thinking that's the whole movie. But that's my roundabout way of saying yes, they talk in this.
Yeah.
So what did you think?
Yeah, it was a really interesting film. Obviously, not having big memories about whether I have seen it or not. There was an element of like, okay, what's the story? How's it going to progress? What's the relationship with the characters going to be like? And I was surprised at how blunt it was about like, regular farm stuff. Like, oh yeah, pigs are things that exist to be eaten eventually. There's the whole like social hierarchy going on here that like goes very much into like, nature versus nurture stuff, power dynamics, and yeah, I wasn't expecting like, oh, the cute pig film. It's probably just going to be, cute pig film, throw it on for the 4-year-old, they'll get everything. But yeah, it went a little bit deeper than that, didn't it?
And darker.
Darker.
The film really opens up on a rather somber note for the cute talking pig movie.
Yeah, and when the film was recommended, the side note, I always thought of this like, oh yeah, it's like an Australian film. I didn't know that it was a co-production.
There's a lot to be said about the production of this, and even when you're watching it, like where it lives. I did mention at the end of the last episode that George Miller was involved. He directs the sequel, but here he's just a producer. But it is one of those cases where it's like Poltergeist, where the producer, in that case Steven Spielberg, had their fingers in the pie
It's
so
like, did he
much
ghost
that
direct it?
did he
Yeah.
basically direct it, and even the director of Babe, Chris Noonan, says as much. Like George Miller was just so involved and so demanding and so up in his grill about it. He basically says it wasn't really my film at the end of the day. It was more George's movie. And George has a statement like, I gave it to him on a silver plate and he didn't take it. And it's like, well, George, why didn't you just direct it yourself then, man?
I remember growing up, like the idea of the directors, like, oh yeah, they're the big brand, they're the one who like own the product, and then growing up, you start learning what a producer
You
is.
start learning names like Harvey Weinstein,
Well,
John Peters, like these
yeah, that's
names
true.
that are like, oh, they're producers. And then you start to realize a bit more, oh, they have a lot more say in what happens in movies.
I remember for me, there was an episode of Ren and Stimpy where Stimpy was directing a movie and Ren was the producer and explained like, yes, I make all the decisions. I'm like, this silly cartoon got it wrong, but nope.
No,
The producers
silly
are the big brain
cartoon.
ones. They're the ones that accept the best pictures, right?
At times, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, they all do. But Babe is a somber movie. It is striking in that way. It's been so long since I've watched it that I remembered the beats of it. I remembered the iconic scenes of it, the characters. But I was taken aback by just how morose and macabre and downbeat the film is willing to be.
Mm.
And I found it actually quite comforting in a lot of ways as well, where there's still many children's films like this or family films like this now where there's just such an understanding that children can handle mature concepts and it's not condescending. I feel like we grew up with so many movies, whether they were all like throughout the whole film like this, which Babe does. Like Babe continues to be like this throughout. Or you have those movies with like the really hard-hitting scenes like a Jumanji I mentioned before. And I feel like we had a plethora of those growing up. And I wanted to be like, oh, we don't get them as much nowadays. But we do get plenty of those nowadays. Paddington has some of that within the whimsy, and even, Into the Spider-Verse, a movie we've both watched and enjoyed as well, has surprisingly mature aspects and the ideas to it for what is a superhero kids movie that's animated and flying around and doing silly stuff. It's something that I really appreciate about storytellers and filmmakers and writers that work within children's entertainment or family entertainment, the ones that are actually like willing to accept that the young children have brains and have feelings, and they may not know how to articulate those feelings, but you, the filmmaker, can weave that for them and help it be a formative experience.
And it can be like an analogy that they can refer back to later in life, where it's like, oh, inequalities, this is just like that scene in Babe, or something like that.
A film, I was thinking about this, a film that would pair beautifully with Babe as a double feature movie night. I don't know if you'll agree with this, but Chicken Run came to mind very often during this. I kept thinking, oh, Chicken Run would actually be beautiful to watch alongside with this.
That's another one that I'm not sure if I've seen the full thing or just part of it.
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah, Chicken Run's also on the farm. It's really upfront and personal with showing us the farm life and how grisly it is. That's the great escape, though. Like they're trying to escape from the farm. Well, Babe isn't. They just live.
I think Racing Stripes had like a throwaway line from a chicken that's like, oh, they said this thing. I don't know what it means. And it clearly meant like, oh, they're going to kill him and eat him.
Mm-hmm. So tell me a bit more about your experiences walking into Babe. You have vague recollections of perhaps watching this in the past, but tell us a bit more about watching it.
It's like a level above vague. Like I cannot confirm anything. I was surprised that it did like the My Blue Heaven thing of like the title cards every now and then. It made it almost seem like it was a compilation of like TV episodes of like a short limited series that like went to a certain conclusion.
Or chapters in a children's book.
Or chapters in a children's book, yes. Thankfully the mice read them out for me because I struggle with that sometimes. Yeah, it's interesting when you get these kind of films that like establish a status quo and like have these firm rules. that the characters are stuck with. Like, you have to do this because you have to be grateful for being a duck or being a pig or whatever, whatever, whatever. And just seeing like how that status quo will get challenged, like if this is a film that's going to end with being comfortable with the status quo or changing it in some way. I was kind of on edge of my seat's probably a bit of an exaggeration, but just wondering, like, okay, how's it going to play out here? What's going to be the way it gets there?
Mm.
And I had a point, but I've forgotten it.
But I actually think this is the edge of your seat type of entertainment. Let's not forget this was nominated for Best Picture. Like, this is a movie that, remove it from just being a talking pig movie, it really finds the sense of place, the sense of theme, and the characters, and just constructs them in a way where you can't help but want to watch it and get emotionally invested. I know the iconic beats of the movie. I know James Cromwell is a wonderful actor, and yet it still doesn't mean that I'm not moved by the end of this when we get the iconic "That'll do, pig," and I'm like, that's the best ending you could do for this movie. Like, I get a little bit weepy, or I get a little bit choked up in the heart, at least, when I see some of the things that they're going on here with. And
I remember when I was reading up about the film afterwards, like reading reviews and stuff, and people kept commenting about, like, oh yeah, James Cromwell, he didn't have many lines in it, but you know, the performance really came through, and that whole thing about, like, he didn't have many lines kind of threw me off because I didn't notice that. It's like I always felt like he was giving us something, and it was clear to me. It's almost like he was saying things all throughout the film. So when they're like, oh, he was a man of few words, I was like, shit, he was, wasn't he?
they talk about him a lot, and that gives him even more of a presence within the movie. His wife is always talking about the narrator, Babe, all of these people refer to him, and yet a lot of the shots when they do that is just him quietly being there. But you do get James Cromwell signed on because it had minimal lines of dialogue. He wanted a bit of a break, but then he didn't really realize that he's in the movie a lot. Like,
that was a fun trivia point where it's like, oh, this will be an easy film for an easy
and he gets a
paycheck.
big dance number, and it's awesome. Yeah, James Cromwell, I mean, just to talk about him briefly, are you at all familiar with James Cromwell as an actor by any chance?
I feel like I've seen him in things, but I can't lift it off the top of my head.
Man, well, he's a delight. He's very tall, as you can see in the movie. He's like 6'5".
Well, certainly next to the animals.
And Magda.
And Magda, yeah.
And the doors in their house where he bumps his head walking through them and he has to like crouch to go through them. Yeah, James Cromwell has been in a magnitude of things. I don't know if you've ever watched LA Confidential by any chance, but he is fantastic in that. He's wonderful. He's the cop and he's a piece of shit, but he's also like sweet. It's hard to describe, but he's really there. He was in The Green Mile. I bring up that often as well. He's the warden in The Green Mile. I most notably remember him for First Contact, the Star Trek film with the Borg. He is the guy who is the founder of warp speed. Like, he breaks through into warp speed in the Star Trek universe. Like, that's his character. And even recently he reprised that role in voice form for the Star Trek animated series that they've got going on. So he is just one of those working actors. He's just been around the block. He's been in so much. I don't know what you would actually know him for, because like I said, he does TV, he does movies, he does voice work, he does live action stuff. He's just always there. He was in The Artist, apparently. I can't remember him in it, but
okay, well, I've seen that.
But yeah, he's he was George H.W. Bush in W, with Josh Brolin as George W. Bush, and he was great in that. I would recommend seeing that. Oh yeah, he was Captain Stacy in Spider-Man 3. He was Gwen Stacy's cop dad in Spider-Man 3. Which maybe we'll have to come back to. He's played a lot of popes, by the way. Just want to mention that. Or a lot of cardinals, I should say. He's been in a lot of... Oh, you've seen iRobot, right? The Will Smith film?
I don't think I have.
Oh, well, maybe that will change one day on this podcast. But I could go through his catalogue and keep going. I'm just getting excited.
I think I looked up his filmography the other day, and I was like, oh, yeah, I know I've seen these things, but I don't remember. Like, The Artist was one of them.
My favorite sequence in Babe, when I was sitting down to watch it last night, I watched it with Rachel. She was like, "Do you want me to be here or do you want me to leave?" I'm like, "You recommended it." It's like, "Okay, I'll sit down and watch it
Like
with
in the
you."
episode or watching it together?
Watching it together.
Okay.
And my favorite scene in this actually was when we kept cutting to and from the big event itself to Magda with all of her friends and how she's hysterical over it. And I just really loved the supreme intercutting that they had going on there, just going back and forth and even going into the room where James Cromwell is not, I was going to say pleading his case, but he's not even saying anything. They're just like, yeah, we'll allow it. I really like that sequence of events. I just thought it was one of those, it's like a sports movie in a way where they when they just can cut together a series of images of people either in the competition or the people watching from the sidelines or the people watching on the TV, and they're all having those reactions. Even to bring it back to something we've done fairly recently on the podcast, Bill and Ted. In the second Bill and Ted, when they eventually get to be on the concert and you have all of those magnificent cutaways to all of the people around the world.
Yeah.
Or even in the Truman Show is another great example. But I'm a sucker for that, but I thought they really weaved it into a nice piece of work here with that sequence there, because that's all before the event happens, like before Babe has to prove themselves and all of that. It really got me salivating. It really got me going, and I'm like, I noticed that I was actively excited by it.
Yeah,
and that's just high praise.
I remember in the room where the guy was like reading out the thing of like, this is an embarrassing thing, but technically there is no rule against it. So what do you want to do? It's like that room was like so dark.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's like lit like a war movie.
Yeah, like a dark conspiracy, or like, oh, we finally met like the leader of this like small town, internationally small deal, but here big deal kind of thing. It's like kind of its own little world, like almost like an adult version of what we were talking about in like Tommy Tricker, where it's like, oh, the obsession with the stamps. Here it's like, oh, the obsession with the sheepdog contest. That was fun. Because it was played straight.
It was, and that's another thing to really commend Babe, is there's another version of this where it's the silly talking pig movie where the pig does a little la 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 and just has a kidsy voice and it's lowest common denominator, but they take it seriously. Like, I never laugh at the fact that our main character is a silly little pig with a little tuft of hair on their head and they're running around chasing sheep.
Yeah, voiced by Chucky Finster and Dexter.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, yes. But I never think about it. Like, I never even think about how humorous this whole entire thing is, because they present it to you in this fairy tale storybook-like way where you understand the conceit with the singing mice and all of that and the little interstitials and titles and everything, where it's so well realized that you can't deny what it is. Like, it's one of those where you can tell when you read the trivia, George Miller had this in his mind for 10 years. Damn right he did. You can tell when you watch that this is a fully formed like thing that has come out, and they take it seriously. Like, James Cromwell is not funny in this movie. He's genuinely sweet and like stern and scary. Like, you're talking about the macabre stuff. There's a sequence where he grabs out a gun and he's going to shoot Babe in the fucking face, and it's treated not just seriously, but offhandedly. Like, it's both.
He's already killed a duck at this point.
Yeah, it's both dramatic and yet casual. Very, 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 very great material throughout all of this when it comes to how they play with the tones of a scene, where both it can be very, very heightened and dramatic, like there he is loading the shells into it, but also so casual, where it almost feels like, you mentioned, like real mundane. This is the hierarchy in life of farming, of just a little thing like that.
It's a nightmare for animal rights activists.
Oh,
yeah. I agree with you, especially about like the well-realized world. Like, as soon as Babe comes to the farm, like the farm does not stop for him. Like the characters that he meets, usher him along. They have patience for him, but it's like, okay, now you have to come here. Okay, now you meet the dogs. Now you meet this animal. Now you meet that animal. Now you learn this rule about like, oh, you're not allowed in the house. You learn that there's sheep somewhat further away from the farm. You get the kind of geography, like the gates over here, the houses over here, barns over here, second barns over here.
Mm.
Like, you start learning everything. And even though I said earlier, like, oh, it almost felt like, snippets of a TV show that come together to a complete product, there really is a lot of information that isn't just self-contained in those snippets. So, it was a bit of a joke when I said it, but it all feels realized. It all feels like everything is there from the start. It's not like a twist of like, oh, you didn't know that we were satanic cultists, and then for the rest of the film, it's like very obvious.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, oh, well, where was all this when we started, or anything like that?
Like that you brought that out of the ether.
Well, it's just like an extreme example. It's, guys who haven't seen Babe, there is no Satan in this. No. Satan is dead.
And God is all. Did you have a favorite scene or something that really stood out to you when you're watching it, or now when you're reflecting on it?
A lot of the things with Fly, the mother dog, was really heartwarming.
Voiced by the Miriam Margolyes.
I didn't realize that until afterwards. Like, oh shit, it's Miriam.
I didn't realize it until she yelled at the sheep at the end. Like, she just did that yell, and I'm like, oh, that's Miriam. I can hear it.
Or did her accent slip or something?
No, it's just Miriam, when she yells, she has a certain way of doing it, because I've heard her yell at people.
Wicked child, wicked sheep.
Yeah. But there's just something about him, like, oh, I can hear it.
I need to have another listen to that. Yeah, just a lot of the stuff there. Again, it was very straightforward, but it was all planned out. Like, when we first meet her, she already establishes the fact of, like, well, when you grow up and then you leave the nest kind of thing. And that happens with her little puppies, and then, she takes on Babe, and, like, when the question of, like, can I call you mum comes up, like, there's no word response, it just happens, and you totally buy into it. All her action throughout the film makes sense. All of the dramatic moments, the sad moments hit for me. All the stuff with her, the other dog,
Rex.
His name, Rex, yes.
Voiced by the Hugo Weaving
dog.
Who's a voice I didn't recognize. I forgot it was Hugo.
Yeah, me neither, but again, I'm also not too familiar with him. Just a lot of the things with the dogs really worked for me.
They're very expressive, very lovely dogs. When it comes to the dogs, I agree they had some truly magnificent moments. The moment where he does come up to her and asks if he can call her mum also reminds me of something that is an obvious touchstone point for a film like Babe is Dumbo, right? Some of the best moments in Dumbo is these wordless sequences of him and his mother connecting even though they're separated, him sleeping in her trunk and stuff like that. And so I think it's obvious to say that something like Babe pays a debt to something like Dumbo as well. And it's even hilarious where a couple of years ago Tim Burton did a live action Dumbo that nobody cared or saw, and it's like, why would you try to do Dumbo in live action? What's the point?
There was some video essay I watched that referenced it. I'm like, did that really happen?
Yes, it did. And it's like, what would be the point? Yeah, especially what's the point after you do something like Babe, which is a live action equivalent that you can point to of like this small, creature that's different to everybody else, and they find their way, and they have all these little episodic adventures that all culminate into an overarching theme and message, and has a loose thread of a plot throughout them all. Like, it's right there. But I agree, the dogs really stood out. I thought you would have been a Ferdy head. I thought you would have been a Ferdinand face.
I thought you called me a furry.
Guys.
I thought you would have been a real furry.
Guys, I think he's projecting a little. I think he's admitting something on the pod. We finally got him after the Chicken Little discussion. We finally got him.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
But Freddy was fun.
You like furry?
I have no problem with furries, guys, all right? I like the funny animals. They're funny.
We hear that, guys? We got it on tape. He likes furries. But Ferdinand, I thought he would have been one of the people you were drawn to. He has that type of specific
nebbyish,
voice.
Anxious energy. When at first he seemed like just, a recurring gag of like, oh, there's the duck that, what thinks it's a rooster or something. But they actually go into like
why he's doing
his psychology and like his profile. And again, it goes back to the well thought out thing. Like, oh yeah, he understands the whole forced notion of like everyone has their role, you have to stick to it, and he realizes that like, oh, ducks don't really have a place at a farm. Like, I honestly didn't even know if he was owned by the farm or he was just like a stray. And so when he gets into the whole thing of like, yeah, I need to force myself into this so that I can have a purpose, and now they've bought an alarm clock, and that's threatening my plan. And yeah, the more you get out of him, the more you realize, like, oh, okay, this guy actually has like a whole motivation.
I like the line that he's an anorexic duck because he's trying to not be plump, and I loved that. I thought that was such a beautifully put together piece of business. Like, you are in a kids movie. You just casually have I'm an anorexic duck thrown in. Love it.
It's good that in 1995 they were trying to get anorexic representation into the discourse for the kids.
Mm-hmm. And it wouldn't be until Zoolander that we'll get bulimia representation, if you remember that joke.
I might. I've seen it twice. I should remember.
Oh, yeah, I've only seen Zoolander twice. Where the love interest in Zoolander, she's like, I'm bulimic. And then they're like, oh. And then they ask if she can, like, move that glass over there with her brain. And she's like, no, bulimia, no, that's telekinesis, Oliver. But Ferdinand, I enjoyed him. I enjoyed him a lot. I think they used him for the right amount. He leaves the movie. He actively leaves. And then he actively comes back. And it's kind of funny how he just comes back. It's like, oh, he's back. And he's like, hey, what did I miss? And everyone's like, oh, God, no, we were so happy without you. Like, everyone hates him so very much.
Babe doesn't, because Babe's nice.
No, Babe is the only one who cares for him. As a person who loves cats, you specifically do, I am indifferent. How did you feel about the villainy of cats in this? That cat representation was shown to be bad.
No. The narrator said there are plenty of good cats in this world. But beware.
I didn't see him.
The narrator said so, and if you say it, it's true.
What did you think of the cat?
It was interesting. So it kind of leads into some of the other things in the film. The animals can understand each other and the humans only hear, the animal sounds that they make. But there are points where they make the animal sounds to other animals, and it's like, are cats the only ones that don't speak like the common language here? It's like every single time we saw the cat until a certain point, it was just like, just cat sounds. We had that also with the sheep at points, and I think we might have even had it with like one of the dogs or horses or something. And it's like, okay, well, how well thought out is this going to be? And then eventually the cat does speak, and it's like really conniving, and we learn that like, oh, when it's got the grudge, that's when it uses its words. And
we did hear that many other people would talk to the cats. We just didn't see those scenes. Like, lots of information was brought to the gang because, the cat said this, the cat said that.
We never really followed any other animals that go in the house when Babe doesn't go in the house. So, yeah, it's all just a big mystery there. And also you got like, cats and dogs relationship. We don't know what they were like. But yeah, and reading up that, it was the voice of Minnie Mouse in one of her only villainous roles.
Yeah. Was she also the voice of Martin Prince on The Simpsons? I think she was.
Oh yeah, wasn't that a thing?
Yeah. I do believe she was.
Yeah, that was a thing, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah. So Russie
Taylor?
Yeah, she's on The Simpsons. That's the name I recognize from The Simpsons from time to time. But she was great. I loved the cat. I just loved that the cat was unabashedly a prick. Just a piece of garbage. And they chose the right looking cat. Like, the cat looked perfect for what they needed. Just this real fluff ball.
Purr with a capital P-U-R-R.
Yes, perfect. But I loved that scene. That was also a highlight for me of just the gaslighting from this fucking cat. And
just like that faux innocence. Like, but did I upset you?
But they're telling the truth. Kind of. But they're being a real jerk about it.
We never see the cat again.
No. I did appreciate that. That scene followed in again with the maturity. He goes to ask about this, and they tell him the truth, and they just bluntly say, like, yeah, your parents, your relatives, probably all dead and been eaten. That's probably what happened.
Yeah, and even when he gets to talk to Fly about it, like, she asked him the question, like, do you want to talk about it? And it felt like it was a really honest kind of question to ask. Like, yeah, you would want to potentially get some sort of closure or understanding about it.
So we have this film that presents itself as very episodic, and at most you are getting a development of his relationship to the other animals, to the owners and the farmland itself. But how did you feel when it started to open up a bit more and present us with, I guess, like the competition plot, or the idea that he's found his natural calling, which is not what pigs do. Like, he goes outside of the rules of nature.
I do remember before I watched the film, because I didn't remember the plot or if I'd seen it at all. And it just basically like, oh, a little pig wants to become a sheepdog. And I thought, like, okay, there's a fun premise little there, going outside your wheelhouse. It takes a while for that to start, but like knowing that premise, you can see like the little bits and pieces adding up. They're like, oh, he meets the the sheep.
The ewe.
Oh, I just got that like ma. Oh, this film really is well thought out.
When he's crying out her name, he starts going ma. Remember?
Yes, I do remember. I thought that was a little silly, but I'll allow it.
Wow.
Fucking babe, how dare you do that?
Make you into pork. They only call you pig when you're alive, which was a damning statement. Boy, is that true, though. I'm not just saying, I'm eating pig tonight.
It's funny because it's true.
And I laughed.
We should call it swine. I'm eating swine tonight. Yeah, you see all the little pieces adding up, like, oh, the dogs go out. It's like, oh, this is something that only dogs do, and even like the little puppies go. And when we do get that scene of like, oh, he sees Rex and Fly do the job, it's this really intense kind of running around, growling, getting down, kind of menacing, and it's like, okay, now it's your turn, and it doesn't work out. And it's clear like, oh, okay, so he's not going to learn to do it as it's normally done. Something else is going to happen. And they have that very honest conversation with the sheep where it's like, look, this isn't for you. This isn't the way it should be done. And
why would you want to be a jerk wolf? They suck.
Yeah.
They're nice. Be nice.
It promotes niceness, politeness. And you've even got like the whole recurring thing of like the racism between like the dogs and the sheep, where it's like, oh, each one thinks that they're dumb. Like I really like
narration.
I really like the scene where Fly was getting the information of like what happened to Ma, and the narrator's like, well, Fly knew without a doubt that sheep are dumb, so she spoke slowly. And then the sheep respond, the sheep knew that dogs are dumb without a doubt, so they spoke slowly.
That they're ignorant.
And it's like playing with the racism. And it's like, oh, that's really interesting. You don't really see stuff like that now, I don't think.
I think you do, but just
maybe
in certain
that
context.
Was a bit too
Again,
blunt.
This feels like very much like Paddington does this a lot in their movies as well. But I love that sequence too. That was oh god, I laughed at that. The narration was really well placed. It didn't hamper or take away from the movie, and I didn't feel like it was hand holding me. They knew when to put it in there, and it was the right voice as well, very calming.
I think if the narration can ever make you laugh, then it's a good narration. Because usually it's just for exposition.
Yeah, sometimes it is used.
I'm making a lot of absolutist statements.
Supremely well for comedy. I'd recommend Arrested Development, where Ron Howard is just narrating, and it's 90% of the jokes from Ron Howard's narration. Very good.
Old PC Sierra adventure games had really fun ones, like King's Quest, Leisure Suit Larry, Space Quest.
Yeah, but I rather liked how slow building the plot was, because it wasn't about that. It wasn't about the competition. It wasn't about Hoggett winning it and becoming the best in the valley and all of that. It wasn't about getting the sheep back from those rustlers that got it. It really is about how Babe becomes comfortable with who they are and how that's a good thing. And not only they become comfortable with it, but everyone else, whether it is the animals or the humans. And so when we eventually get to this culmination with this televised event where everybody has to come to terms with who this pig is and what they do, it just really hits it out of the park of what the movie has been building towards. Talking about another brilliant piece of filmmaking, or specifically audio. We have the lead up where everyone's laughing their asses off and really uproariously having a go at Babe for doing this. But once Babe gets it started, silence.
Oh, edge of the seat without a doubt at that point.
No music. Silence. For a movie that, if I had to complain, the music is a little bit 90s whimsy a lot.
There's a lot of whimsy, yeah.
A lot of 90s kids whimsy, and all they needed was some more fart sounds and bells and whistles, but they knew in that sequence, take it all away. Take it all away. No music, no one clapping or reacting, just the sound of the hooves moving and the trotters and the grass and the characters briefly going, hey, thank you for that. Could you move over there now?
I think the announcers should have gone like, huh? What's happening?
They did fail their job. But I thought that was, wow. I mean, talking about not pandering, that there is really something you can point to and say they really took the craft of filmmaking and they applied it there to the way that you ought to. It was also arguably one of the best pieces of the movie when it comes to just how they constructed it in general.
Really good use of silence.
And I like a good competition. I like a good, we've got an objective for our hero and they're going to be derailed from it, or the cat's going to lead them to do this, or Rex is going to do that, and there's jealousy here, or there's self-doubt there, and there's, the judges aren't too sure about this, and Mrs. Hoggett thinks it's weird, and all of that bigotry or prejudice or hurdles that have to be overcome by Babe is masterfully done, because Babe does take it to heart. Like, Babe does get hurt. Babe does have emotions. Babe is a child. And so these comments, these statements, these looks hurts Babe. And so they are a character that feels more worthy of following than if they were the, I'm going to say it, but if they were the Harry Potter type, where they're just like, I'm the protagonist, and I'm just going to keep going forward.
Could have used a scar on his head, though.
They're not like Harry Potter, though. Like, that's always been one of my disconnects with Harry Potter. Harry Potter has like all of this in the movies. I'm not talking about the books, but in the movies, Harry Potter is this character with all of this shit against him, but he just has such a fucking can-do attitude that I find to be unbelievable, and if not unbelievable, definitely isolating. That's why when it comes to those movies, I related more to Ron, because Ron didn't have that. Ron was a nervous Nelly. So I just bring that up as an example about what makes Babe work even more. Like, you're moralizing to children, right? But you're also showing like how children, your feelings get hurt. You actually do, like, you actually go through that. You cry about it. You run away. But it's about picking yourself back up again. That's the thing. I mean, how did you feel just about that element of it when it comes to this? Because it's a very sweet film, but it isn't afraid to, not pull back its punches when it comes to those beats of the story.
Yeah, again, it's just, I wasn't expecting that sort of maturity from the Talking Pig film that I figured, I probably saw that when I was 5, so it must be, kind of made purely for 5-year-olds or maybe like a little bit older, something there. But yeah, it's just a very honest film that can be used as an allegory for things in real life, and that was an astounding element of it. I was really, really pleasantly surprised by it.
Are there any other things you want to touch upon? Elements, scenes, characters, or just pieces of information you've got?
Is it believable to think that a little pig could kill a sheep?
I mean, no, I thought that too, but with what we saw, I mean, he couldn't even bite their legs. A dog could kill a sheep.
That scene ended and there was a little bit more of the film happening. I thought like, oh yes, everyone's really mourning the sheep. And then it almost felt like a plot twist to me that like they thought that the pig killed the sheep. What?
Oh, okay. As a viewer, I immediately knew once he got the blood on his nose, I'm like, it's going to be one of those moments.
I mean, yeah, I saw the blood on the nose, but I'm like, oh yeah, if this was a more ferocious type of animal, they'd think that it did it.
Oh, by the way, the movie has blood.
Yeah, on the pig snout.
And on the sheep. We see its like throat. It's fucking brutal. Well, pigs can be vicious. I mean, pigs can go you.
Yeah, that's why I meant like a little piglet though.
I mean, I don't know if it's out of the realm of possibility, but I agree. That was a little beat in the story where I go, okay. But I went okay in this way. Come on, Hoggett, you know this pig.
Exactly. Didn't you hear the narrator when you first met the pig? You had a connection.
Yes, your destiny and fate and all of that.
I like the element also when he was signing the form to enter the pig. He's like, Mr. Hoggett was an honest man, so if it said name of dog, he knew that he couldn't get around that.
But then
That was funny. I really liked that. And it was also very sweet.
I thought you were talking about when he first grabbed Babe they put down his information on his guests, and they're like, we'll call you if you win. And it's like, oh no, when you win.
Oh, you mean the contest? No, I meant later on when he's submitting the form to put him in the competition.
Yes. I was just thinking about when we first met Babe, like he first met Babe, and they had that connection.
Yeah.
Well, talking about that connection, the cinematography was really great when it came to James Cromwell and Magda, because they're made up to be older looking than they were. And I think the makeup and all that looks fantastic, because James Cromwell, outside of the sideburns he basically looks like that now. More white hair on the top of his head than what we saw, but he basically looks like that.
When I was reading that Magda Szubanski was in her like early 30s when she did the film, like, oh wow, the makeup really made her seem older.
Yeah, if anything, from what I gather, it's making her look like how old she is currently now.
Yeah.
Which, yeah.
Maybe even a bit more, but...
Yeah, maybe a little bit older, but definitely they were supposed to be in like their late 50s, so...
Yeah, they had grandchildren, so...
Fun fact, their son-in-law, the guy who, talked about the fax machine
like
and all
a bit
that.
of a turtleneck.
Yeah, he was the main character in the series Farscape, but he was one of the other agents in the Matrix film, in the first Matrix movie. There was other agents, so Hugo Weaving and this guy are both in the same movie, and just a fun little piece of information.
We should rewatch the film and see if he ever gives Rex like a look, like a knowing look.
But I just bring up the cinematography because you get so many beautiful shots of just James Cromwell's stern face, but also that warm, reassuring look of just, I'm all right. It's like, hence the final sequence in the movie where he says, "That'll do, pig," and he gives the look to the camera, and you just go, you know what? It will be fine. We're all good. That's the end of the movie. I just wanted to bring it up because, he's one of the people you get drawn to when you watch this. And there's a story, I imagine you read this too, about James Cromwell being in the older makeup.
Something about his father, right?
Yeah, James Cromwell has talked about this in the past, but he's an anxious actor. And so up until that point, he's done several movies, but nothing with as big of a leading role as in this movie does. Like, he's in most of the movie. He's the leading human role in it. But yeah, he's always had that doubt of his abilities. And so he had that moment apparently, and I've heard him talk about this in interviews even, where he got choked up where he saw himself in the reflection of the lens and he realized like he was his dad. He looked exactly like his dad. And it really motivated him, he's almost like his dad talking to him, saying, "That'll do, Jamie. Like, you're doing good." And it's very, very, very tender and loving. And this movie had an impact on everyone involved, pretty much on most people involved making it. Like, George Miller had this was a passion project for him, something that took him ages. He was waiting for the technology. Chris Noonan also was involved and wanted to make this story, even though he had conflicts making it. Yet you have Magda, where this gave her internationally make her well known, when we just knew her for skit comedy at the time. She wasn't even doing Kath and Kim then. That was before Kath and Kim, which is probably what she's best known for now.
When did that start? Was it early 2000s?
Yeah, I want to say very late 90s, early 2000s. I want to say early 2000s, but
I only saw a few episodes of it.
It was great, but and then
she played netball in that, right?
Yes. And she's always got an injury of some sort. That's her character's joke, like a neck brace or a wrist thing or something. But what was I saying? Oh yeah, you got people involved who make this, and then you get James Cromwell, who's an activist. He got arrested a couple of years ago because he was protesting at I think like a nuclear power plant or an oil refinery or something. He got arrested, and that's like him. He puts his money where his mouth is when it comes to his activism. He was a vegetarian while making this, and now he's a vegan because of making this movie. And last I checked, I think he was still vegan. So he's one of those guys where when you look him up, he's a bit of a beatnik hippie guy, but he's been actively like that. He kind of reminds me of the actor Ed Begley Jr. in that way, where they often play, and Dennis Hopper as well, where they often play in their movies the rich yuppie type really well, because if anyone knows how much the man sucks, it's hippies. And so you get that.
When he gets arrested, do you think the cops tell him that'll do?
That'll do. And
he's like, no, stop it.
He's a big guy.
Those are my words.
Those are my words. He's a big dude. But I don't have too much else to say about the film itself. There's some little interesting conversation pieces I have, but other than that, I really enjoyed it. I thought it was an uproarious time. I made me want to watch the second one as well, but also just made me want to watch more great family films. Like, I've mentioned a few of them on here, and they've all been floating in my brain because I'm just excited to watch that. I mean, how often do you have that, per se, when you play a video game or you watch a movie or a show where you watch something of a certain ilk, a certain genre, say, and it does such a great job of it that it makes you want to go on a bit of a stint of watching more of that genre?
It probably happens every now and then.
Yeah, and I think Babe really did that for me. Like, I don't think I've said recently on this podcast, oh man, I've watched this family film and it's making me want to watch more family films.
Well, I know for me, and you've probably been putting up with this for many years, like you bring up some iconic thing and I'm like, oh, I don't know if I've seen that. So it's the kind of thing like, what else out there haven't I seen? I know that there's a couple of things that you've mentioned like a million times that every time you ask me about, I'm like, no, remember, I haven't seen that.
Yeah, Alien.
Alien and Babe, Pig in the City.
Similar films.
I know that one wasn't received as well, but it's actually kind of on the same level.
I think it's better.
Oh,
Roger Ebert and Siskel also thought it was better.
Okay.
I think Siskel made it his film of the year.
Interesting.
And you want to hear something very funny? Siskel loved Third, and he just kept saying, "I've got a pitch for you, George Miller. Babe 3, it's called Ferdinand, and you just make a movie about that duck. I love that duck." And Roger Ebert just smiling and nodding, going, he's pretty good, but like you can tell he's like, I don't love him that much, but he's pretty great, that bird.
Siskel is a confirmed Ferdy.
I mean, it's hard because I said I've watched them both pretty equally, and so things merge from them. This does have the benefit of more James Cromwell action, but I really do. You would love the second one for a specific sidekick animal character.
Okay.
And I don't want to give away too much about that in case we do watch it. But let me just say this. They have a gangster voice, like a street tough voice. Like, hey,
yeah, this world could use one of them.
You basically teams up with Babe, and Babe is now in charge of a gang. And so you have Babe being like...
Is it like a city animal?
Yes.
Yeah, nice.
Well, yeah, it's set in the city. It's just a regular... Well, actually, yeah, it's a regular animal that you would be, but the voice they use for it and just the gags of like, Babe will be like, "Hi there," and then this creature, it's a dog. I'll give it away. It's a dog.
Okay.
Will come up and just be like, "Hey, the boss is talking to you," and that's a you type thing.
I did hear that the voice for the second film was Tommy Pickles instead of Chucky, right?
Oh, I didn't have
these like Rugrat things going on.
Yeah, because Babe gets a little bit older.
Right, yeah, you go from Chucky to Tommy. But Chucky was older. And also more Magda Szubanski in that, less James Cromwell. Yeah. Okay, that's an interesting
also,
change.
the city that they go to is an amalgamation of practically every big city in the world. Like, you see it and it's like, oh, there's the Taj Mahal, there's this, there's that. Like, it's every city.
That sounds a lot of fun.
It is. And it looks like it's in a snow globe. It's really great.
That's cool. I mean, we should do it.
We should do it.
At some point.
Is there anything else you want to go over? Because I just have one or two things I want to mention.
In terms of negatives, like I've mentioned a couple, like the sheep thing, the kind of inconsistency about like the animal sounds, but the only other one really is, as much as I did like the stuff with the dogs, there comes a point where we don't get a fair bit of Rex. Like he gets aggressive, he bites James Cromwell, he gets the injection, and then he's just kind of off the side, not really doing anything, and then he comes back and he's like a different character. Like, I know that when they
gave us his backstory.
Yeah, they gave us his backstory. And I know that when they mentioned the injection thing, they said that, like, oh, after he takes this, he'll, never work again or something like that. And I took that to mean, like, oh, is he going to become, like, lobotomized or something? And the fact that we weren't hearing anything from him, like, gave me that impression, like, oh, this is, like, a no longer a man kind of thing. But then when he came back, he was just, like, a virtuous kind of character. Like, I still like the character, but I feel like there needed to be like a middle ground shift.
A couple more steps
to
be taken. My big complaint is 80% of the movie is overdubbed, including the human actors. I found that distracting how much of it was dubbed, and I don't know why. And then I think I do know why, which is, where does this take place? Where does this take place?
Mm-hmm.
According to Siskel and Ebert and many American reviewers, they're like, at it in Australia. It's an Australian film. It's set in Australia. You got Australian actors and James Cromwell. It's set in Australia. And then I thought that as a kid. I'm like, oh, it's set here in Australia because it's got Magda, it's got some Australian people. But then,
obviously, because I thought this was just an Australian film, I thought that growing up. But then watching the film, I thought like, oh, America. But then Christmas wasn't snowy.
No, and it's apparently, according to IMDb's trivia, it's in England. It's like rural England. And then I go, I can kind of see how that could be the case because the way that they dress is more rural English country
especially
than
Magda's
rural
friends.
Australia. Like the fact that nobody's wearing an Akubra hat, for instance, like the iconic Australian farming hat, for instance, gives that, and it has that kind of greenness that you would associate with an English farm rather than an Australian farm. So I was thinking about that, but what really throws me, and this is where I couldn't find any trivia about this, but I wonder if they had them all speaking with their natural Australian accents, and then for the American market, or for this to reach a global success, they had them all dubbed back over with American voices, because James Cromwell's the one who's least dubbed in the movie because he's using his natural voice, which has a bit of an Irish lilt to it anyway, but he's American, but he can naturally have that lilt. And Magda, she's doing an American accent. Like, she's not doing Magda's voice, and she's not doing an English voice either. And the guy, like I said, the son-in-law, he's Australian, and I'm noticing he's doing a bit of an English accent, like, hello there, blah. And he was very much dubbed, and then he would be doing an American, and the daughter's doing an American. And I wonder if that was the case or not. And that was my biggest gripe with it. And obviously this isn't like, when I say that sounds like it's a very damning piece of criticism. But in all honesty, you get used to it after a certain point. But it really did make me wonder where this was from. And then once I started to think about that and noticed the dubbing, I'm like, I reckon it was originally supposed to be either Australia or England. And then they've dubbed it over with these American accented voices over the top of it for the human characters.
I mean, you could tell me otherwise, but off the top of my head, I can't really remember any English accents.
Right?
I only remember the Americans, really.
It's weird.
Yeah, I thought this was like, rural America.
Yet it doesn't look or have the hallmarks of any of that.
Yeah.
Like, correct me if I'm wrong, Americans, but I don't think of American culture, farming culture, to have sheepdog competitions. Like, that's something I think of in Australia and in England doing way more. Now, that may be me being naive here, and I'll fully admit to that. Like, I'm sure that exists, but like the sheepdog culture that they have here seems very Australian and very English to me as well. They had some Kelpies in this movie. I was like, hey, it's in Australia. They have some Kelpies. Like, I was like, hey, there's some Australian dogs. Like, so I don't know. It is something, and that's why
it was filmed in Australia, right?
Yeah, and that's why the second film is even better, because they just throw it all out the window and say, we live in a world where every culture is in one place.
This actually takes place on Pangaea. Pangaea never separated.
Wouldn't that be bold?
That would be really cool twist. Like, hey, we never said what country it is.
But Christ existed.
Guess which continent it's on. Notice I said continent singular.
Oh, by the way, we didn't mention it. Great gag with the fax machine. They kept building on that fax machine. Magda was very much against it, but we learned that James Cromwell, he's very for technology, hence his gait. And we keep seeing him use the fax machine and get more comfortable with it as it goes along, to the point where we have an epic, I've got to grab the phone, and he just grabs the phone off the fax machine and dials it like it's nothing. And I just thought that was great. They didn't draw too much attention to it. It was just a little thing that kept building in, and I just thought, thank you so much. Thank you so much for this.
Yeah, and again with the American thing, like in the credits, like obviously one thing to look into in films like this or Racing Stripes is like, oh, who are all the voice actors? And there were a couple of names that I did notice there. It's like, yeah, they were all like kind of Americans or people that I hear in a lot of American products. Like I saw the voice actress for Jimmy Neutron was there.
Mm-hmm.
There was a guy Neil Ross. I think he played Volgan in Metal Gear Solid 3.
Oh, nice.
And Moneybags in Spyro 3. There's a lot of threes. Yeah, and it was just like all these Americans, so that kind of led more into the idea of like, oh yeah, everyone had an Americanish accent, so this must be America.
And then you got Miriam Margolyes there.
Yeah, and that's, again, one. I think I did read that she was in the film like a week before I watched it, but then when I saw her name in the credits as Fly, I'm like, oh, shit, I didn't catch that.
Truly great. Now, I think we both recommend Babe.
I think we both do.
One last statement to make. How do you feel about a film like this getting a Best Picture nomination? Because this was, like I said, a little bit before our time. Like, we existed but weren't cognizant of things.
Oh, it was years before I mastered English.
I feel like in the 90s, late 80s to 90s, to eventually Shrek, they were far more willing to nominate family films for the Best Picture with stuff like Beauty and the Beast and stuff like this.
Yeah.
And then eventually, I feel like once, and I've talked about this before, I have a problem with the Best Animated Picture category because it does feel like they look at it as this is where the kidsy things get put.
In animation in general, it's the big controversy section on like every year's Oscars, it looks like.
And I do think that that category being made did significantly reduce down family films being nominated for such prestigious awards. I mean, a few years back, I brought it up several times, and I know if Ben, the film buster, listens to this, he would burst a blood vessel because he hates Paddington. But people were genuinely upset that Paddington 2 didn't get any of these big nominations, yet, or Hugh Grant specifically. Like, he had been nominated for some big awards for that because he's genuinely excellent in the movie. But when we get to like the big hitters like an Oscar, I feel like they just don't like a film like Babe would never be a contender anymore. How do you just feel about just that? Because we mentioned like Babe, Best Picture winner, but like to me that's just something that it's really hard to imagine.
Yeah, I think there comes a point where you just, you know what? Before we started recording this, you were telling me like, oh, you hear that E3, the video game annual expo, is like cancelled and not happening anymore. It feels like, if this big organization that's in charge of assigning esteem to all these films is just missing the mark for a lot of people, do we stop taking it seriously at this point?
Yeah, exactly.
I know that there's like the big spectacle every year and there's things to talk about, but at this point it's like, they're not changing when talking about animation. Just, fuck them at this point kind of attitude. Maybe they will change, who knows? The thing about life is the older people die and then the younger people take over everything.
And they let films like Parasite and Everything Everywhere All at Once win. No, I completely agree. I just think it's interesting about how films like this would have such high acclaim, and we, the viewer, still give them such high acclaim. There's many popular films that are made for children, or TV shows more nowadays, that are made for younger people that are just as resonant with adults. I think we're actually in a great age for children's entertainment and family entertainment.
Yeah, you'd already told me this and I'd already heard it, but I came home from work at some point this last week. A weird thing to say. And my brother was like, you know what I watched? I watched that new Puss in Boots film, and it was not overhyped. Like, it was legitimately really good. Every single actor did fantastically. And I'm like, oh, shit, wow.
And I still haven't had the chance to see it. Yeah. My wife saw it, and I've heard nothing but great things about it.
When my brother is telling me that an overhyped film was actually, like, phenomenal, it's like, oh, geez.
And I loved Puss in Boots and the Shrek films, so, it's a win-win. Maybe one day I'll watch it.
Well, we have to watch the first one with the rape joke.
I never watched the first one, and I don't know what that means. What's the joke?
Prison rape joke. Sorry.
It's sorry. Okay, I get it now.
Yeah. Prison rape's funny, remember?
Yes. I've watched Big Stan. So, what is your recommendation for the next episode? Now, everybody knows this, but we have Polish Lent coming up, which means we take a week off from podcasting because, we're Catholics. So
no, we're podcasters.
Yes.
And Polish.
Sorry. Before the phrase podcast got invented by Apple, we used to just call them Catholics.
Did Apple invent the name?
You just said iPod.
Well, I know, because iPods were the big thing. Oh, who cares?
They're Apple iPods.
Who cares? I care, but
Yeah, you
who
did. You just
cares?
interrupted the flow. I was just going to say, before the phrase podcasters were invented, it was just called Catholics, and we'd have crusades about it.
Hmm.
But what are you recommending for when we do return from Polish Lent?
So you might be guessing what sort of thing I'm recommending already, Ryan, because Mr. Police, I left you all the clues. But
The snowman again.
sorry,
The snowman.
the snowman.
Again.
Well, there was a sequel. You didn't hear that it was made.
Oh no.
This time they did 70% of the film. No, so last year you made a unofficial request. Or like, this will be something nice to do, something in your wheelhouse, Bartek. And I said, well, you know what? There is literally one thing that fits that category, and I think I'll do it next year. So every year I pick a Bollywood film, and I think now is the time to do our Bollywood film.
Yeah.
So last year when we did The Darjeeling Limited, a film that was made in India, it had Irfan Khan in it, and we had a good conversation in that episode about how, this guy is really good. We'd like to see a whole film about him. I mentioned there is only one Bollywood film I've seen that has him in it, and that's what I want to recommend. And it is on Netflix. I remember a week ago, you, Rachel, and a friend of ours came to hang out at my house, and we watched something on Netflix, and it showed like my most recent search. I'm like, oh shit, spoiler. I don't know if you noticed.
I may have, but
you may have. So it's a 2009 film. It's called Billu, Billu. It's the name of the main character.
Okay.
It's sometimes also called Billu Barber, like barber, like it's his job. But
okay.
So I think it's mostly known as Billu, but I've always called it like Billu Barber. But
I mean, it sounds like it would be a part of the Bahubali universe.
No, that's a different film industry.
Oh, I know.
So yeah, Billu Barber, it's on Australian Netflix, so it's easy to find. Thankfully, every Bollywood film I've recommended has been on some sort of streaming service.
On Netflix, specifically.
Oh, well, no, Doom I had to lend you. But yeah, Netflix, it's on there.
Fucking Netflix, where's the Doom films, you dummies?
Yeah, there's 3. You can get all of them.
I'm sorry, I was really happy that I said doomies.
Yeah, they're dumbasses, right?
Oh, Red Foreman's here.
Dumbass! Doom my Charlie!
Doom. Can you imagine Kurtwood
Smith, please sing the Doom thing. All 3 of them, please.
All three. Doom my Charlie! Doom. You can
bring Deborah Jo up with you. That's fine.
Oh, she could sing the Doom, like the whispering Doom, but in the kitty voice.
Yes.
Doom. I can't do the kitty voice. No one other than her can. Oh, man. So that is it. People, make sure to follow us on social medias of Facebook and Twitter, Spit and Polished Presents. You can email us, spitandpolished@gmail.com. All of this is in the description as per usual. Make sure to check out this film. We'll have it in the description below in case you do need to get the spelling of it again or whatever the case may be. Give it a watch for yourselves in the meantime. How long is it?
A regular Bollywood length.
Okay, so guys, clear a good 3 hours out of your day.
I think they've all kind of just been like 2:47-ish.
Oh, yeah. A good 3 hours, because you might want to take a little bit of a break in the intermission point.
You might want to watch it in like 4 chunks as the filmmakers intended.
Oh, yes. Okay, so here's your plan, guys. When the intermission happens, watch Avengers Endgame. And when that is done, then you finish it. So then you've spent 9 hours of your day watching really long movies.
And we're assuming you watched the other 21 films in the Billu Barber universe beforehand.
Oh, please tell me that there's 21 more films that all interconnect.
A lot of films are mentioned in the film.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Well, that is all we have to give you. Until next time, remember to be kind to each other.
Kindness is good. I haven't seen too many things that Magda Szubański has actually been in, but I know her because, being a Polish person in Melbourne, she seems to get brought up a lot in my family.
As a menace or as a hero?
Just as a person that exists, really. I remember one time Mum was like, oh yeah, I went to get lunch at St. Kilda and she was having lunch there. That was interesting. And we have this one family friend who is very involved with the Polish community here in Melbourne. And I remember Mum said, like, oh yeah, I went to this event with her and Magda was one of the... She called her Magda. Magda was one of the people...
Because your mum's on first name basis with her now.
Well, it's also every time someone has a Polish name, it's the Polish pronunciation. So every time you said Magda in this episode, I'm like, ugh. This guy.
This
Yeah,
guy.
Magda Szubański. Yeah, and she was there, and we exchanged some words, but yeah, she was there working with my friend. And I remember once my stepbrother, who does a sort of electricianish job, once installed a thing at her house. Just
So he knows where she lives.
at some point, he
I
did.
have a story too. When I was on drama camp, which was a camp we had for country kids to go to Sydney once a year to see a bunch of shows,
Mhm.
we were staying at a youth hostel hotel place, and across the way was like a fruit and veg market, and we walked through it, and there she was getting stuff because she was in Sydney at the time doing Guys and Dolls, the musical, the stage musical. And this was when she had just lost a bunch of weight because she was the Jenny Craig spokesperson at the time. That was like a
Okay.
big deal. It was like all over the place. And now it's been a big deal since then because Jenny Craig is kind of like fucked up a bit. So it's one of those things where it's like you can lose weight in the moment, but it doesn't help you consistently. So she ballooned again, and it's a whole thing. But I have my little story too about seeing her, and she was like buying big pumpkins.
She has a internal radars, like a Polish person's going to be here
I better be doing some activity.
with some sort of connection to Bartek Kasprzyszak, I guess.